So this is the very first video in a series of videos we're going to make. This one is going to be the very intro one on how to use our fossil paint. I want to show you how to apply the first coat, how to apply the second coat, how to distress, and how to wax. After that, it's going to get a lot more exciting. For now, we'll see how it goes. This is our very first video in this series, so if there's lots of mistakes, just overlook them, please. Okay, come on, get your hands dirty. Okay, so this is one of our Van Gogh fossil paint brushes. This particular brush is not available anymore because we have switched manufacturers. They couldn't keep up with our orders. So we have found a new manufacturer and our brushes are being made. So you can't get these anymore, but our new ones will be very much like this, only even better. But it's a natural hog hair bristle, and as you can see, the tips are graduated, so they're shorter and they gradually get longer, and then they get shorter again. And the same thing happens at the edges in this oval sort of layout. This is called the ferrule. These ferrules are stainless steel. That's really important. If you use a brush that has an aluminum ferrule, it's going to rust. This handle is kiln-dried wood, which means it takes a lot more water to actually make the handle swell. Now the reason that's important is because once the handle swells, it expands the ferrule and the bristles become loose, and then you start losing a lot of them as you work. Now when you first get a new brush, it's natural to lose some bristles. I recommend that you thoroughly wash your new brush and give it a good sort of scrubby, scruffy pull like this before you use it for the first time. I will do another video on the proper washing of brushes, which might sound obvious, but I'm going to do it anyway because maybe it isn't obvious. Now the other thing you want to be sure of is that you don't get paint up into the ferrule. You never want to dip your brush into paint more than halfway up. If you do, then the paint goes up the bristle into the ferrule, and of course as it dries it expands, and again we end up with issues of losing hair because you haven't taken care of the brush properly. Also, you don't want to leave your brush sitting in water overnight for the same reason. Water wicks up through the bristles into the wood, expands the wood, and you know what happens. I'm going to be careful not to dip the brush in more than about halfway. Sometimes I go 3/4 of the way, depending on how large the surface is that I have to paint. Now for this little molding, I don't need very much paint at all. If you have more paint than you can use on the object you're painting, you're going to have to get rid of the excess paint. That's another reason I don't like some of those other brushes that people use that are, maybe 3 times the width of this. They're so big that you have to get so much paint in that brush just to use it. You end up wasting a lot of paint. This is the perfect brush for this paint. So I'm going to dip the brush in about halfway, and I am not going to do this. Wipe off the paint. A lot of people want to do that because that's what you do when you're using house paint. But for fossil paint, just let the paint drip off the brush a little bit, wobble back and forth, and bring it over to your piece of furniture. The object is just to get the paint from point A to point B. Point A is the can, point B is the furniture. So all I want to do is get the paint onto the surface. I'm not even trying to be artistic or clever. I'm just trying to get the paint from the brush to the molding. And once I do that, now I will stroke it out to leave an even film thickness. Look at the amount of pressure I'm putting on the brush because I want to leave just the right amount of paint on the piece. Once you stroke the paint out, don't go back into it. Don't fiddle fart around. You saw that I just got the paint on there and then I stroked it out. Now if you do get a little glitch, I don't know if you can see that. Can you see that little thing right there in the camera? Camera person? Mm-hmm. Okay, if you get that, take it out now and then stroke it out. And that's it for the first coat. But just one more tip about using your brush. Notice how I'm handling this. I have the brush sitting like that. It's resting between my 2 fingers here, and I'm holding onto the ferrule. That gives you the most control, and it's the most ergonomic way to hold the brush so that you don't get repetitive strain injury. And when you're working on a big piece of furniture, make sure that you work from your shoulder, so up here to your shoulder, instead of just your wrist. That is going to wear you out very quickly. But if you work from the shoulder and you make large stroke marks, not only will you get a better finish, but you'll be kinder to your body. Okay, darlings. Now I want to show you how to apply the second layer of paint. But I want to reinforce something that we will put into text in the first part of this video where I laid on the first coat of paint. And that is, don't lay the paint too thickly, or more importantly, too thinly. If you put your first or second coat of paint on and it's too thin, then what will happen is you'll get a very streaky application, and you'll be able to see the color of the substrate underneath through the layer of paint. If you put the paint on too thickly on a horizontal surface, then the paint might crack. And that's something we usually charge extra for, so that's fine. If you put it on too thickly on a vertical surface, then the paint might sag, and that is a real no-no. So this brush is designed to help you apply the paint at exactly the right film thickness. You want it to be a little bit thicker than normal house paint. Okay, so now we're ready to get our hands dirty with layer number 2. Now this is the sample I made earlier, and it isn't quite dry yet, and you can tell because it's a little bit darker here. That makes sense because the paint has pooled a little bit in these areas. The other problem is I force dried this, so I took a heat gun and tried to dry it quickly, and the problem with that is it dries the surface of the paint before it dries whatever's underneath. So if it's a little thicker in some areas, then the top surface dries and the bottom surface is still wet. And if you tried to distress this, you'd just take off a big glob of it. But for the purpose of this video, it's dry enough for me to apply the second coat. Now, when applying the second coat, you're going to notice that the paint dries even more quickly than it did with the first coat, because this paint is absorbent and it's sucking the paint in as soon as I start to apply it. So the trick is to move quickly to get the paint onto your surface, and then to quickly just stroke it out. And again, if you see any little blobs in your paint, take them out now and stroke it out. And now I'm going to stroke this part out, and you're done. No fiddle farting around. Okay, so now I want to cover distressing. Most of the time I distress my pieces a little bit, unless I'm going for that really modern look. If I do that really modern look, then I usually don't distress at all. 90% of the time I'm going for something that looks vintage, so I do distress it. You have 3 choices of tools for distressing, and I have them laid out here from least aggressive to most aggressive. The least aggressive is just a t-shirt. The middle level of aggressiveness is 600 grit wet dry sandpaper. This is what it looks like on the back. This is 3M's brand, but you can use any brand. And it tells you 600 grit. And just for your trivia questions, your trivia games, the number on the grit count refers to how many little pieces of grit or sand there are in a square inch. So 600 grit has more little pieces in it in a square inch than 120 grit. So if you're like me, you used to get confused about those sorts of things. Now you know. This is what one of the packages could look like that you might buy for your 600 grit sandpaper. You want it to, for sure to say 600, and you want it to say wet dry, because we do all of our distressing wet. And then the third level of aggressiveness is just a scrubby pad. You can buy name brand ones. I got these at Safeway. And the color of the scrubby pad actually does indicate the coarseness or the abrasiveness of the pad. If you can find the gray ones, those are actually my favorite, but they're not available everywhere. These are available almost everywhere. Don't be tempted to use the ones that have an orange sponge on the other side, because I have found little bits of sponge come off in my finish. So I don't use those, I use just the scrubby pad. And as you can see, I take it and cut it up to something that's easier to fit in my hand. Here's the piece that I just finished painting. I have force dried it again. You don't want to do this when you're really painting a piece of furniture because the product doesn't dry as it normally would if you force dry it with a hair dryer or a heat gun, and you won't get nice results. The first thing you want to do is get your piece wet, and I am not kidding, don't be shy. In here I have my special Van Gogh water. I'm just kidding, it's just water. We sell the Van Gogh water though, $20 a bottle. Okay, you see that I really have gotten that quite wet. Now, if you're working on a piece of furniture that, like a cabinet or something, I'm going to tell you the story of when I was doing a trade show and I was painting a piece of furniture in my booth, and people would come by every 20 minutes to see my progress, and it was a pretty cool thing to do if you're ever doing a trade show. Paint a piece of furniture in your booth and you will have tons of action. But anyway, this little boy was watching me for a long time. He was about 8 or 10. And I had a big bucket of water beside me, and I kept putting my scrubby pad into the water and bringing it over to the furniture and doing that, and then distressing. And he asked me, "How do you get the water onto the furniture?" And I'm thinking to myself, "You fool, you've been standing there watching me do it." But I didn't say that. What I said, because I'm a mom, is, "Oh, I just put my scrubby pad in the water and I bring it over here and I just, scrub it on there." And he said, "Why don't you just use a spray bottle?" And I thought, what a brilliant idea. So now that's what I do. Thank you, 10-year-old nameless boy. That would have been much smarter. So once my piece is wet, I can now start to distress. The reason I want you to distress your work while it's wet is twofold. The first reason is it makes much more organic marks in your finish than if you use dry sandpaper. It looks like it's been sanded. It doesn't look like authentic wear marks. And the other reason I want you to do it wet is because then you have no dust. Dust is the enemy of paint. And if you're sanding a large piece, that's going to create a lot of dust, and it's a big mess you have to clean up, and then you have to paint, you have to wash the piece before you wax it. So this is the magic secret. Now I'm going to show you all 3 levels of distressing. This is my least favorite method, and I use this 2 times. I use it on the legs of chairs because I can just wrap this around a chair leg and bring it up and down very quickly, and it distresses the legs very quickly. And who's really going to pay a lot of close attention to exactly how you distress the legs on a chair? Just really want to get it to match the rest of the piece. The other time I use the scrubby is if the paint has been curing for a week or more. It gets harder as it dries. So after a full 30 days, the paint is cured and it's as hard as it's going to get. Now, you can use that to your advantage. If you don't want to distress through the top layer and the bottom layer into the wood, then paint the first coat and let it dry for a week. Then paint the second coat and distress that either the same day or the next day. And then it takes a lot more pressure to get through that first coat into the wood. Okay, so my piece is wet. Take my scrubby, and I'm not applying very much pressure at all. And as you can see, I've already gotten through to the bowl, which is the color underneath. The color on top is empathy. Let me show you now how it works with the wet dry sandpaper. I like to fold it in half so I have 2 sides, and that way it doesn't seem to slip as much and I can get a better grip. So now I'll do the same area. Now you can't really see how much distressing I've done because if you look on the sandpaper you can see that I've got some paint on there. What you're doing when you distress is you're creating a slurry of paint and water, and that's the real advantage to using fossil paint, because the paint will reactivate and allow you to remove some of it, but not in that aggressive way with, for example, house paint. House paint will come off in rolls because it has a polymer or an acrylic in it, and then you don't get as natural a distress mark. So you can't see how much you've distressed because there's a layer of watery paint on top. So in order to see how much distressing you've actually done, you want to take a rag and squeeze out all the excess water, get yourself a nice flat pad, and then wipe off the water. And there you can truly see how much distressing you've done. So now let me show you how to distress with a t-shirt. So again, you want your piece to be wet. And I'll just wrap this around my finger. And let's say I want to be very particular about the shape of this distress mark, because I want it to look natural. Here, they're all the same width. That's not really how furniture distresses. It'll be thicker in some areas, thinner in some, more aggressive in other areas. So when I use the t-shirt, I can shape the way that distress mark looks. Now, that's how I normally use the t-shirt, is to augment what I've already done. But if you want to go slowly and carefully, you can use nothing but the t-shirt to distress your work. So the tool you use is up to you. For me, this is just a bit too tedious. Now, as you can see, I've gone right through both layers of paint there. This is just a molding sample which had white primer on it. But if this was a piece of furniture, that would be the wood. And I actually like showing the wood. I prefer a little bit of wood showing through here and there. A little note about distressing. The worst thing you can do is to be symmetrical. One here, one here, one here, and one here. If I distress that way, I'd have 4 marks, all approximately the same size, spaced out evenly in a pattern. Wear and tear doesn't happen like that. You want to be as organic as possible. So try not to create a pattern. Instead, try to think about how a piece of furniture might actually become worn. And most wear happens from cleaning. So over the years, as you clean your piece of furniture, if this was the top of a dresser, for example, most people are right-handed. So if I was approaching this from your point of view, my right would be on this side, and I would probably have more wear and tear on that side, because as I clean the dresser, I put a little bit more pressure on that side because I'm stronger on my right side. Or low down near where somebody might kick the piece of furniture, or if it's a piece of furniture that you move back into place after vacuuming with your knee, there might be a wear mark there. If there was a handle, always distress under the handles in the direction you would grab the handle to open the piece. Always distress the edges, because that's where furniture gets its most wear and tear, on the edges. I almost always do all the edges. So once you have finished your distressing and you're happy with it, then you need to wipe the surface clean. Now, if you distress too much, sorry, I'm just going to back up a little bit. If you distress more than you like, it's only paint. So go ahead and put some more paint back on. If I decided I didn't like that, I could put some more empathy paint right there. However, that takes a little bit of skill so that it blends in with the rest of the finish, so it doesn't just look like a patch. So my advice is put it on with your finger and just go like that. Once you're happy with your distressing, make sure that you rinse your cloth out with the Van Gogh water. It could happen, you know. Who thought they'd sell water in bottles and make money when you can get it for free out of the tap? In Vancouver, we have really, really good water. Excellent water. Mountain fresh spring water. It's incredible. And you know what? People still buy bottled water. Okay, I digress. When you're finished, you want to take a nice smooth pad of just damp cloth and wipe all of that slurry off. Otherwise, you'll have a powdery finish on top that's going to mar your wax or tabletop finish. And then you just set it aside to dry, and be careful not to get your fingerprints all over it. Just wipe it and let it dry. And once it's dry, then you can go on to waxing. Okay, so final step, and that's using our Van Gogh beeswax furniture finish. It comes in natural and French caffeine. The reason I call this natural is because it isn't clear. It does actually change the color of your paint, and I'm going to show you that. It's more noticeable on lighter colors than darker colors, and it's very, very subtle. It's a slightly amber hue, because that's the color of real beeswax. The French caffeine is exactly the same as the natural, except we import pigment from Europe, and then we blend color together, several colors together, to get exactly the warm undertones of brown that we want. And then we send that over to our wax maker, and they put it into the natural while it's still melted, and then they pour it. Now when you get your beeswax, it'll be perfectly smooth on top. You're going to want two brushes, one for your natural beeswax and one for your French caffeine. Now it's okay to use a brush that has natural in your French caffeine, but you wouldn't want to go the other way around, because then you would make your natural wax brown. So you want two separate brushes, and because our wax doesn't have any turpentine or paint thinner in it, as many of our competitors do, you don't have to worry about combustible brushes. In other words, most of those turpentine-based solvents are combustible. So if you were to leave the wax on your brush and put it in plastic, which many people do, you are risking spontaneous combustion, and it could just catch on fire. So luckily with ours, that's not an issue, because nothing is in our wax except beeswax and mineral oil. So after you've finished using it, if you want, you can take a paper towel and wipe off the excess if you have a whole lot of blob. But, you know, if there's just a normal amount on there and it's not all blobbing around the edges, just leave it how it is and put it in an airtight plastic baggie and save it like that till next time. I never clean my wax brushes. It's great. What I'm going to do on this piece is I'm going to put natural on one side and French caffeine on the other, so you can see the difference. So first I'll start with natural. And what you want to do is just swirl your brush around in the wax to load it. And then, I think I'm going to leave that for the French caffeine because it'll be so nice over that bowl. You want to push the wax into the paint, not onto the paint. What we're trying to do is actually impregnate the paint with the wax. And that's what provides a beautiful seal and protective coat. So once you've done that, then you need to wipe off the excess. So you take a smooth cloth, lint-free, and you wipe off the excess, and then you leave it to dry. Leave it for about half an hour, depends how hot it is and how humid it is where you are. You could leave it till the next day. And then you come back and buff it, which I'll show you after I finish applying the wax. So you see there's always a bit of excess. There's no way to avoid that. I have been asked about melting the wax and applying it that way, and I tried it, but it wastes a lot of wax, so I don't recommend it. So now I'm loading up my French caffeine, and you see I have quite a bit on there. It's more than I need, but that's okay. And now I'm going to do the same thing. You push the wax into the paint, not onto the paint. And you want to make sure that you cover every single piece of the surface. You don't want to leave anything without any wax on it. It'll look different from the rest of the finish, and it won't be protected. So once you've applied your wax, once again, you want to wipe off the excess. Now there's two things you can do. You can wipe it off with a smooth pad. I'm just going to wipe off back and forth. And then you just get a uniform, slightly dark finish. Or if you want to create some more interest in the piece, you could make this little rosette thing out of your cloth, lots of wrinkles, and you could take it off like that, and it'll leave streaks. I hardly ever do that. Maybe if I'm doing kitchen cabinets, I might do that a little bit. I'm going to make a nice smooth pad. Now, this bit in the crevice here, it will take a long time to dry if you leave it thickly like that, and that's fine. You absolutely can. But if you want it to take a little bit more out, then just do so. And then I would let that dry before I buffed it, but I'm going to buff it just to show you. Normally I would let that dry more. You want a totally smooth pad, and you are going to use hardly any pressure whatsoever. The kind of pressure I want you to use is if you were doing this on your face. So I'm using only very light pressure, and I'm going back and forth quickly to buff this nice smooth pad. And I'm going to buff this. I'll show you this piece after I buff it. Again, it's quick, but not a lot of pressure. I'm just doing that to see if you'll be able to see the sheen. And I'm going to remove the tape so that you can see the difference. So the natural, nothing, French caffeine. And if I wanted this to be even darker, I would let the wax sit on there a little while longer before I removed it. But you can't wax a whole piece and then come back and remove the wax. You need to work in sections of about a square foot, maybe 2 square feet at a time if you're working pretty quickly. Otherwise you'll get join lines. Now if you should leave it on somewhere too long and you get a join line, our wax is actually pretty awesome. You can work that out. Let's pretend that I had neglected to do this part. If you just work the wax into that dry line and put a bit of pressure on there, you will likely be able to come back and just work that right out, which is something really fabulous about our beeswax. Okay, now I want to show you one more option, and that's something that's the middle of the road. I want something in between natural and French caffeine. I often do this. And I could mix the two waxes in a separate container and then melt them in the microwave, and if you do that, do it in 10-second intervals and do not take your eyes off it because it could ignite. Or you could do what I do, which is way easier. I will apply natural in a pretty healthy dose everywhere, or maybe not even everywhere. Sometimes I'll leave the edges of something without any natural wax, and then I will put straight French caffeine on those unwaxed bits, and then I'll work it into the natural that I put on there. And in this way I can create sort of a halo effect, which is really pretty. And now wipe from the mixed part to the unmixed part. I want to leave some of this unwaxed so you can see the effect of the wax. And now I have something in between, and this is over chalk, which is not pure white, it's just a little bit off-white. And I think that's actually really pretty for most pieces and most colors. But it's up to you. Okay, so thank you so much for watching these videos. I know it's not nearly as much fun as being in a class, and I am usually a lot more fun in a classroom, but it's hard being it's hard being funny when I'm just talking to a camera. But those are the basic steps for using the Van Gogh fossil paint and the Van Gogh beeswax furniture finish. Now we do have a tabletop finish, which is a really tough as nails polycarbonate clear coat, and I'll talk about that in another video. And we have our whole line of furniture makeup products, our liquid metals, and we'll go into all of those in our other videos. But for now, my darlings, thank you for watching. Bon appetit!